Good evening, I'm Maham Tawa with the news-making headlines around the world. The Council of Ministers reviews in its meeting today the outcome of the 26th Arab Summit, which ended in Sharm el-Sheikh, Egypt, yesterday. The emissary of the UN Secretary-General for Humanitarian Affairs says that Kuwait is sending a message of peace and security to the whole world by hosting the third International Donors Conference for Syria. UN Secretary-General Ban KiMoon names His Highness the Emir of Kuwait, Sheikh Sabah Al-Ahmed Al-Jaber Al-Sabah, as a global humanitarian champion. And the Information Center for the Third International Humanitarian Pledging Conference for Syria opens here today. In our first item today, Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim, His Highness the Emir Sheikh Sabah Al-Ahmed Al-Jaber Al-Sabah received this morning the Deputy Prime Minister and Foreign Minister Sheikh Sabah Al-Khalid Al-Hamad Al-Sabah at Sif Palace. طب مش انتم مش His Highness the Emir Sheikh Sabah Al-Ahmed Al-Jaber Al-Sabah received at Sif Palace today the Deputy Chairman of Kuwait's Supreme Judicial Council and Cassation Court and the President of the Constitutional Court, Judge Yusuf Limtawa. His Highness the Emir Sheikh Sabah Al-Ahmed Al-Jaber Al-Sabah sent today a cable of congratulations to Bahraini Prime Minister His Royal Highness Prince Khalifa bin Salman Al Khalifa for the successful medical checkup results, wishing him health and wellness. His Highness the Crown Prince Sheikh Nawaf Al-Ahmed Al-Jaber Al-Sabah sent a cable of congratulations to Bahraini Prime Minister His Royal Highness Prince Khalifa bin Salman Al Khalifa for the successful medical checkup results, wishing him health and wellness. And His Highness Sheikh Jabal Mubarak Al-Hamad Al-Sabah, the Prime Minister, also sent a similar cable. Under the patronage of His Highness the Emir Sheikh Sabah Al-Ahmed Al-Jaber Al-Sabah, Kuwait's 6th session of the Holy Quran International Recitation and Memorization Award kicked off today. His Highness the Prime Minister Sheikh Jabal Mubarak Al-Hamad Al-Sabah attended and inaugurated this ceremony organized by the Ministry of Awqaf and Islamic Affairs. The event began with the national anthem, Quranic recitation, followed by a statement by the Minister of Justice and Minister of Awqaf and Islamic Affairs, Yaqub Al-Sana. Then Dr. Adil Al-Falah, the Ministry's Undersecretary and the Award Supreme Committee Chairman, addressed the gathering. His Highness the Premier, who spoke at the end of the ceremony, affirmed His Highness the Emir's support for the award for all activities that promote true values of Islam, its message of tolerance, encouragement for moderation and Quranic memorization. This ceremony was also attended by the Minister of State for Housing Affairs, Yasser Abul, advisor at His Highness the Premier's Diwan, Sheikh Dr. Salim Jaber Al-Ahmed Al-Sabah, ambassadors of Arab and Islamic nations, senior officials of the state and the Premier's Diwan. His Highness the Crown Prince Sheikh Nawaf Al-Ahmed Al-Jaber Al-Sabah received this morning the Deputy Prime Minister and Foreign Minister Sheikh Sabah Al-Khalid Al-Hamad Al-Sabah at Sif Palace. National Assembly Speaker Marzouk Ali Al-Ghanem met the Secretary General of the Inter-Parliamentary Union, the IPU, Martin Shangong, in the Vietnamese capital, Hanoi. During the meeting, the two sides discussed means of boosting mutual cooperation and relations between the two parliaments, as well as discussing the most important issues being highlighted during the 132nd Inter-Parliamentary Union Assembly. Al-Ghanem and his accompanying parliamentary delegation left the Vietnamese capital Hanoi after the conclusion of the session. The Council of Ministers was informed in its weekly session today, which was chaired by His Highness Sheikh Jaber Mbarak Al-Hamad Al-Subah, the Prime Minister, of the messages to His Highness the Emir from the Director General of the Food and Agriculture Organization and the Executive Manager of the World Food Programme, in which Kuwait was invited to the forthcoming event on progress in the world against hunger, which will convene in Rome on the 7th of June during the UN FAO conference. The Cabinet was also informed of two messages to His Highness the Emir from His Excellency President François Hollande of France and Her Excellency President Dilma Rousseff of Brazil and His Excellency Irakli Garibashvili of the Republic of Georgia. The messages dealt with the existing relations between Kuwait and those countries. Speaking after the meeting, the Minister of State for Cabinet Affairs, Sheikh Mohammed Al-Abdallah Al-Mbarak Al-Subah, said the First Deputy Premier and Minister of Foreign Affairs, Sheikh Subah Khalid Al-Hamad Al-Subah, briefed the Council on the statement issued by the Gulf Cooperation Council last Thursday regarding the developments in Yemen. The statement spoke about the serious developments which took place in Yemen, destabilizing the security of that country and creating chaos and devastation as a result of the coup against legitimacy carried out by the Houthi militias. The coup and the aggressive acts which accompanied it became a grave threat to the security and stability of the region, as well as for the international peace and security. The GCC countries made all possible efforts to protect its security and stability and to assist the people of Yemen in their attempts to regain stability and security, and in response to the request by the Yemeni President Abdurrabbu Mansour Hadi by stressing the need to abide by the GCC initiative and its executive mechanisms. The Council of Ministers then reviewed the outcome of the 26th Arab Summit, which was concluded in the Egyptian resort of Sharm el-Sheikh recently. The summit discussed a wide range of issues related to the current Arab state of affairs, especially amid the serious developments in the region. The Minister of State for Cabinet Affairs also reviewed the outcome of the summit resolutions, most important of which was the establishment of a joint Arab military force in which the Arab countries can voluntarily participate. The force will be used to protect the national security of the Arab countries and to defend their sovereignty. Sheikh Mohammed Abdallah Al-Mbarak Al-Subah said that the Council of Ministers hailed the speech delivered by His Highness the Emir at the opening session of the Arab Summit, which asserted Kuwait's full support to the Kingdom of Saudi Arabia and the rest of the GCC members, while exercising their right of self-defense after all peaceful means were exhausted to resolve the crisis in Yemen, and in response to the demand by the Yemeni president to provide immediate Arab and international assistance to preserve Yemen's security and stability and to join the Storm of Resolve operation. His Highness the Emir also called for the immediate implementation of the GCC initiative and its mechanisms, in addition to the outcome of the comprehensive national dialogue among the Yemeni groups. His Highness the Emir also said that terrorism, with its annihilating and destructive ideas and atrocities, have become the most serious challenges which the whole world is facing. The Minister of State for Cabinet Affairs said the Council of Ministers expressed deep thanks and appreciation for the tremendous efforts made by His Highness the Emir and their Excellencies and His Highness's leaders of the Arab countries to arrive at the fruitful results adopted by the conference, which will fulfill aspirations of the Arab people. Finally, the Council of Ministers discussed the political issues in light of the recent reports about the Arab and international developments. His Highness the Prime Minister Sheikh Jaber Al Hamad Al-Subah received at Sif Palace today the Minister of State for Municipal Affairs and Minister of Communications Isa Ahmed Al-Kandari. Minister Al-Kandari introduced to His Highness the Premier newly appointed senior officials at Kuwait Ports Authority KPA, Director General Sheikh Yusuf Al-Abdallah Al-Subah Al-Nasir Al-Subah, Assistant Director General for Planning Affairs and Shuwaikh Port Walid Khalil Al-Toum, Assistant Director General for Administrative and Financial Affairs Yahya Khadr Al-Abdal, and Assistant Manager of Operations and Al-Shaiba Port Adnan Jawad Al-Saigh. Al-Kandari also introduced to His Highness the Prime Minister Chairman of the Directorate General of Civil Aviation Fawaz Abdelaziz Al-Farah, Director General Yusuf Sulaiman Al-Fawzan, and four newly appointed deputies Fahd Sulaiman Al-Wagiyan, Khalid Mbarak Mohammed Al-Shaibi, Imad Faleh Awad Al-Jloui, and Ahmed Isa Al-Ghoud. The envoy of the UN Secretary General for Humanitarian Affairs, Chairman of the International Islamic Charity Organization and the advisor at the Amiri Diwan, Dr. Abdullah Al-Matouk, said Kuwait, by playing host to the Third International Conference for Donors to Syria, adds a new chapter to its record, which is full of donations. This came in the speech in which Dr. Al-Matouk opened the Third Conference of Charity and Non-Governmental Organizations for the Syrian People earlier today. The conference was organized by the International Islamic Charity Organization, in which more than 100 local, regional and international charity societies are taking place, in addition to 140 individuals. Dr. Al-Matouk said Kuwait is sending through this conference a message of peace and security to the whole world. He also expressed hope that all would see this conference as a means to mobilize the efforts of the humanitarian organizations and foster effective partnership in humanitarian action. Chairman of the International Islamic Charity Organization also expressed thanks and appreciation to His Highness the Emir Sheikh Sabah Al-Ahmed Al-Jaber Al-Subah, humanitarian leader, for his patronage to this conference. Dr. Al-Matouk said Kuwait is sending a message of peace. Addressing the opening session, the Undersecretary of the UN Secretary General for Humanitarian Affairs and Coordinator of Emergency Aid, Valerie Amos, expressed deep thanks and appreciation to the State of Kuwait for playing host to the Third International Conference of Humanitarian Pledging for Syria, which will open tomorrow under the sponsorship of His Highness the Emir Sheikh Sabah Al-Ahmed Al-Jaber Al-Subah. Representative of the Organization of Islamic Cooperation, Hisham Yusuf, pointed out that humanitarian work in Syria is extremely difficult and complicated, saying that more than 600 people were killed while on humanitarian aid distribution to the Syrian people. The amounts pledged at the charity organization's meeting today totaled $506 million, of which 87 million were pledged by Kuwaiti individuals and societies as follows. His Highness Sheikh Salim Al-Ali Al-Subah, Chief of the National Guard, $20 million. The Islamic Charity Organization, $10 million. The International Mercy Society, $15 million. Society of Direct Aid, $5 million. The Ministry of Awqaf and Islamic Affairs, $5 million. Al-Zakat House, $5 million. Sheikh Abdullah Nouri Charity Society, $5 million. The Heritage Revival Society, $7 million. Awqaf Public Foundation, $5 million. Kuwait Popular Committee, $3 million. Patients Aid Society, $3 million. Najat Charity Society, $2 million. And Union of Kuwaiti Banks, $2 million. UN Secretary General Ban KiMoon lauded the role of His Highness the Emir of Kuwait, Sheikh Sabah Al-Ahmed Al-Jaber Al-Subah, describing him as a global humanitarian champion. In an exclusive interview with Kuwait news agency Kuna and Kuwait TV, Ban expressed his deepest appreciation to His Highness the Emir for his generous and compassionate leadership in hosting the Third International Donors Conference, Kuwait 3 for Syria.
I'd like to thank my deepest appreciation to His Highness Emir of Kuwait for his generous and compassionate leadership in hosting this third international conference for Syria this is the third time which he is hosting with the United Nations. There is a huge necessity for the Syrian people. Therefore, I'd like to tell the world leaders that we need still a lot of resources. Our estimate at this time, we need at least $8.4 billion to address the current humanitarian crisis. $2.5 billion for the Syrian response plan and $5.5 billion for the region. I sincerely hope that the international community will render their generous and warm helping hands.
With the problem that we had with the first and the second conference, donor conference.
هل تم وضع آليات خلال المؤتمر الثالث للمانحين والذي سيعقد في الكويت لضمان إيفاء الدول والمنظمات المشاركة بالتزاماتها تجاه اللاجئين السوريين؟
Of course, there have been many promises, but not all promises have been realized. But as far as the Kuwaiti conference are concerned, there's a huge, highest rate of commitment have been delivered. For example, last year, there was a commitment of $2.5 billion. More than 90% of these commitments have been delivered. I'm very much grateful for such a generous support.
His Highness the Emir and the State of Kuwait
قدم سمو الأمير ودولة الكويت نموذجا يحتذى به في العمل الإنساني. كيف يمكن للأمم المتحدة تعميم هذا النموذج على مستوى العالم؟
I particularly hope that countries in the region will come out with a more generous support as Kuwaiti government and people have been doing. Of course, they have been always generous. I'm aware of all this current regional and international situations where the needs for humanitarian support has grown exponentially. But still, we have 12 million Syrian people who have been displaced internally or who have become refugees in the neighboring countries. So we need to help them. We should not abandon these people unattended.
المجتمع الدولي لا يزال منقسما وغير قادر على التوصل إلى وقف لإطلاق النار والدمار في سوريا. كيف تستطيع الأمم المتحدة وبعد المؤتمر الثالث للمانحين العمل على حل هذه الأزمة في سوريا سواء سياسيا أو إنسانيا؟
The Syrian tragedy has entered its fifth year. During last 4 years, at least more than 220,000 people have been killed, and 12 million have been affected. Therefore, we cannot describe the level of tragedy. It's a very tragic situation. Therefore, it is always necessary to resolve all these issues through political dialogue. My special envoy, Staffan de Mistra, has been working tirelessly with the Syrian authorities and the opposition groups by having Aleppo freeze. It has not been able to get the full support from the opposition side. Now, in the absence of this progress, we had some internal discussions. We are actively seeking how and what way we can really activate political process. As you know, Geneva Communique was endorsed by the Security Council, and therefore it is important to implement this Geneva Communique. there is no other alternatives but political solution. We will do more on activating this political process.
Okay. And in the end, I wanted to
أطلقت على سمو الأمير لقب القائد الإنساني، وذلك لمجهوده الدولي تجاه العمل الإنساني. كيف ترى الدور الذي يقوم به سمو الأمير والحكومة الكويتية تجاه المشكلة الإنسانية المتأزمة في سوريا؟
in such crisis.
The government of Kuwait and people of Kuwait under the leadership of His Highness Emir have been most generous and compassionate in addressing humanitarian crisis which is now happening in the region. I have been working long time with His Highness, even while he was Prime Minister. So my relationship with him has been long-standing, and I have been very much impressed and touched by his very generous and compassionate leadership coming from his heart. That is why I really wanted to show his compassion to the world by designating him as global humanitarian champion. I hope that other leaders will also emulate.
شكرا سعادة الأمين.
EU's top humanitarian aid officials paid tremendous tribute to Kuwait's humanitarian aid efforts and underlined that the 28-member bloc will pledge a substantial amount at the 3rd International Humanitarian Pledging Conference for Syria in Kuwait on March the 31st. Meanwhile, various delegations are continuing to arrive to Kuwait to join in the various activities preceding the conference tomorrow. Our correspondent Salim Al-Kandari managed to conduct some interviews with some delegations upon arrival to Kuwait International Airport.
National Humanitarian Pledging Conference for Syria is underway here in Kuwait, and upon arrival we managed to conduct some interviews with delegations to learn more about their plans to alleviate some of the sufferings that Syrian people face in and outside their country. Here are some of the reactions.
Well, it's a very, very important conference as far as we're concerned, and we're very grateful indeed to Kuwait for holding it here. I think it's tremendous that they're doing so. We will be pledging £100 million in sterling for the suffering people of Syria. What's happening in Syria is truly dreadful, and I think it's right that the world should come together here in Kuwait to provide what relief we can. I think it's important that the world recognises that this is going to be a long-term problem and that we need to move to a basis of long-term funding so that we don't have to keep coming back and pledging, so that the countries that are hosting so many of the refugees, such as Jordan and Lebanon, can make long-term plans for education and the other services that the refugees require, so that they need a basis on which to plan. They need long-term funding.
We are very encouraged that the 3rd International Pledging Conference for Syria is being organized in Kuwait under the patronage of the Emir of Kuwait and in association with the UN. It's a very important measure to alleviate in some measure the suffering of the Syrian refugees, and we also know that there are a lot of neighboring countries which are hosting these large number of refugees: Lebanon, Jordan, Egypt, Turkey, Iraq, etc., and which is causing a huge strain on the natural resources of these countries. So we are very encouraged that a conference of this kind is being organized, which can alleviate in some measure, as I said, the suffering of the Syrian people.
This is a very important conference, especially in this moment, very important moment. So we come here, we support these efforts, we support the efforts, rules that Kuwait play. Actually, I think this conference is very important, and every time, every conference have special meanings, especially after that people suffered so long. and so serious situation, so that there's efforts, works continue, and there's a lot of contributions, especially it's a very important country like Kuwait. In the past, there's a lot of efforts, international efforts. Right now, that we hope there's more efforts and contributions to help the people in Syria and in other places.
I joined Mr. Ban KiMoon, the UN delegation, to attend the Kuwait conference, the third pledging conference for Syria. I'd like to take this opportunity to appreciate the Emir, the leader of this country, and its people for their generosity over the years to help the people of Syria. Clearly, this third pledging conference is important, and hopefully we will bring new supporters, new donors, in addition to the traditional donors for humanitarian crisis. And I want to thank the government for taking the leadership in this very important area. Well, of course, there is huge demand from the world, given the many humanitarian crises and health crises we are experiencing. The demand on donor countries is truly huge. But I think the world's leaders have the capacity to do more in solidarity with people who are suffering in the name of humanity. And this is exactly what your country is doing. I want to thank you for that.
Reactions centered on the point that the international community should mobilize all its forces and determination to achieve a political solution as soon as possible. From Kuwait International Airport, this is Salim Kandiri reporting for the English News.
Kuwait is to host the third International Humanitarian Pledging Conference for Syria tomorrow that aims at providing further assistance to around 12.5 million Syrians who are either internally displaced or refugees in neighboring countries. Delegations from 78 countries and over 40 international organizations will take part in the Syria conference. By hosting this conference, Kuwait hopes to continue its humanitarian contributions worldwide, living up to its title as a humanitarian center. Our reporter Heba Abdurrahman has the details.
With the opening of the Media Center of the Third International Humanitarian Pledging Conference for Syria, Kuwait hopes that it lives up to the task of its humanitarian obligation after being handed the UN Humanitarian Center title for its humanitarian contributions worldwide, especially after the country hosted 2 aid pledging conferences for Syria.
It is a great honor for Kuwait to be chosen for the 3rd time in 3 years as the host for this great conference. It is also a unique and great honor for Kuwait to be nominated and awarded not 1 but 2 unique awards. Kuwait's Emir was given a plaque of recognition naming him a humanitarian leader, and this is, to my knowledge, the only time it has happened in the history of the modern world. Also, the State of Kuwait was named as a center for humanitarian activities in the world. Also, to my knowledge, I think this is the only time this great honor has been bestowed. These honors were bestowed on Kuwait by His Excellency, the Secretary General, and by the United Nations, because we come and provide the UN with what is required by them as partners in any humanitarian issue. Therefore, I'm leading you. You have to present this question to the United Nations. If we are asked to host these conferences, I'm sure we'll be happy to. As of yet, we have been asked for the 3rd time in 3 years to host the Syrian Donor Conference, and we are hosting it as we are required to.
Extremely important occasion that we are hosting the 3rd Syria Conference. And because the crisis in Syria is becoming much more complex, the number of people being affected is almost 12 million, already more than 12 million. So we're extremely grateful to His Highness the Emir, the leadership and people of Kuwait for once again organizing and hosting the 3rd pledging conference. This is the 3rd time in 3 years. So, and we are extremely grateful, because I'm sure the people of the Syria and all those who are directly or indirectly affected by the crisis will also be extremely grateful and appreciate the efforts. So we're looking forward to a successful conference and we're extremely excited.
Well, I think this is a marvellous contribution from Kuwait that shows once again the leading role that Kuwait and His Highness the Emir have been taking in leading an international humanitarian effort. I'm very proud that the United Kingdom is up there, right up there with Kuwait as one of the leading contributors globally. Our support for the ongoing, now multi-year crisis in Syria remains undimmed. But it is essential that countries in the region are prepared to take a lead, and that's exactly what we're witnessing. Kuwait has been prepared to do, not once, not twice, but now for a third time, and it deserves our full support and recognition. Well, we live in difficult times, and everybody's, not only their generosity, but their attention is taken up by a number of challenges. So we've been working very hard with our Kuwaiti friends in preparation for this summit here. We've been making a very clear and strong commitment. Our minister who will attend is announcing £100 million of additional support from the United Kingdom. So we hope that others will follow suit and reflect the fact that Kuwait has been uniquely generous and steadfast in supporting this effort.
Visiting media delegations were also taken as field visits to several cultural establishments in the country, like Kuwait House for National Works, Mubarakiya Souq, Al Shahid Park, and Salmiya Theatre to watch the silent play Hope.
In our final item, we check on the local business news where Kuwait Stock Exchange ended trading today on a red board with the three main indices edging down. The price index closed 36.7 points down, while the weight index also fell 4.8 points, and Kuwait 15 index dropped 18 points. The number of trades amounted to 3,782 transactions, worth about 15 million Kuwaiti dinars, with around 121 million shares changing hands. For a chance to see our reports again, please visit our YouTube channel at MOI Kuwait News. Well, with that, we conclude our news bulletin. Thank you for joining us. Have a pleasant time. I'm Mam Tawa. Before we go, we remind you once again of our main top stories. Have a pleasant time and good night. The Council of Ministers reviews in its meeting today the outcome of the 26th Arab Summit, which ended in Sharm el-Sheikh, Egypt, yesterday. The emissary of the UN Secretary-General for Humanitarian Affairs says that Kuwait is sending a message of peace and security to the whole world by hosting the 3rd International Donors Conference for Syria. UN Secretary-General Ban KiMoon names His Highness the Emir of Kuwait, Sheikh Sabah Al-Ahmed Al-Jaber Al-Sabah, as a global humanitarian champion. And the Information Center for the 3rd International Humanitarian Pledging Conference for Syria opens here today.